During our honeymoon, I awoke in the middle of the night to discover my husband engaged in a mysterious and alarming phone conversation. Overcome with fear, I mustered the courage to peek into his smartphone, uncovering a revelation that surpassed all belief. Armed with knowledge of his undisclosed plans, I seized his passport and, determined to confront him, hastily returned to the United States alone, ready to exact my vengeance. As I plotted my course of action, a stranger approached me, an ordinary office worker named Helen from New York. I recounted my story, detailing the events leading to my impromptu return. Little did I know that Helen's seemingly unrelated tale held a bizarre twist of its own. Helen, an office worker with a seemingly idyllic marriage to Frank, stumbled upon a disconcerting discovery just before their wedding. Arriving home late one evening, she noticed an unfamiliar pair of women's heels alongside Frank's work shoes. Fearing infidelity, she overheard muffled voices, Frank's and a woman's, prompting her to record the conversation. Bursting into the living room, she was relieved to find it was her mother-in-law and not a clandestine affair. However, the revelation of an impending move, undisclosed to Helen, left her bewildered and determined to put an end to the unexpected upheaval. The two stories converged, both women grappling with unexpected revelations and navigating the complexities of their relationships. I couldn't simply agree to decisions made without my input. However, when they asserted that it's common for newlyweds to live with their in-laws, suggesting it might be easier for both of us, I found myself reconsidering. My mother echoed this sentiment, making a compelling case. Acceding to the idea, it was decided that we would move into Frank's parents' home. In retrospect, I now realize that Frank has a strong bond with his mother. Living with my in-laws proved to be an arduous experience. Frank's strong attachment to his mother intensified, making her the go-to person for anything he needed. While my mother-in-law handled most of the household responsibilities, if I ever cooked, Frank would compare it to his mom's cooking, often stating hers tasted better. I felt the strain of not being able to assert myself, and had I been more assertive earlier, perhaps the situation wouldn't have unfolded this way. The challenges continued as my father-in-law largely ignored my presence, occasionally dismissing my attempts at conversation. My role in the household remained unclear, and my biggest concern was my mother-in-law's lavish spending habits. She had a penchant for branded clothes and bags, constantly approaching me with requests for financial assistance, citing temporary cash shortages. Despite my reservations, I felt compelled to comply, depleting the savings I had accumulated since college. When I attempted to discuss this with my husband, he brushed off my concerns, emphasizing that we were living rent-free. Although I hadn't chosen this living arrangement, I stayed because my husband, despite his flaws, genuinely cared for me. He would plan dates on our days off and even orchestrate our dream honeymoon to Venice, a destination I had always longed to visit for its authentic cuisine. Despite the challenges of living with my in-laws, I clung to the hope that my husband's kindness would prevail. Yet my anticipation for the honeymoon morphed into a nightmarish ordeal after a revelation from my husband. Late one night, as I woke up to use the bathroom and noticed his absence, assuming he was there too, I approached only to overhear him engaged in a phone conversation. Listening closely, I was shocked to hear him say, "My wife's going to be gone Friday night. Don't worry, Mom, I've got it all planned. I'll get back to you." It seemed he was speaking to my mother-in-law, but the ominous words left me fearful. Hastening back to bed, I feigned sleep as my husband returned, eventually succumbing to snoring. Seizing the opportunity, I discreetly took his smartphone to the bathroom. Fortunately, there was no password, and despite the discomfort of the circumstances, I had to investigate. Opening his messages, I uncovered a horrifying plot in chats with his mother. They were conspiring to end my life for insurance money, which she intended to splurge on branded items. Overwhelmed with fear, I couldn't fathom that my seemingly kind husband was involved in such a sinister scheme with his mother. Documenting their conversation with my own phone, I spent the rest of the night too terrified to sleep. With the dawn, as transportation services resumed, I recognized the urgency of my safety. Gathering only my essentials, I decided to leave the hotel alone. Just before departing, I noticed my husband's passport on the desk, and a daring idea struck me. I took Frank's passport, aiming to strand him abroad. I proceeded to the airport, boarded a plane, and returned to New York ahead of him. Throughout this time, Frank relentlessly called, but I ignored every attempt at contact. Back in New York, unable to return home due to living with his parents, I set up in a relatively inexpensive city hotel. Intent on seeking revenge, I gathered more evidence and reached out to lawyers. I occasionally visited our house when his parents were away, discreetly retrieving my belongings bit by bit. Despite Frank's persistent attempts to reach out, I continued to ignore him. After a few days of this solitude, I found myself at his parents' house, gathering my possessions. Helen, his mother, was at her knitting class, and his father was out golfing. Anticipating their absence for at least 2 hours, I packed my things. Suddenly I heard a noise. Turning around, I found my father-in-law standing there. This wasn't part of the plan. Frank and I were supposed to be on our honeymoon in Venice until today. Panicking, I wondered what excuse I could possibly give. Should I be honest about returning to New York alone? But what if my father-in-law was involved in whatever scheme Frank was planning? These thoughts raced through my mind. Seeing my confusion, he suggested we talk over coffee and proposed heading to a nearby diner. Not wanting to be there when my mother-in-law returned, I agreed to his suggestion. As we sat at the diner, he wasted no time inquiring, "So, why are you here when you should be abroad? What happened to Frank?" Hesitant to reveal the truth, I asked if his wife had informed him of anything. Looking puzzled, he responded, "I haven't heard a thing." His genuine reaction led me to believe he was unaware of the situation. Deciding to trust him, I laid out the entire situation, showing him the printed messages exchanged between Frank and my mother-in-law. His face displayed sheer shock. "No way! I've seen them whispering together a few times, but I never thought they were plotting something like this." It became clear that my father-in-law had no knowledge of the plan. Confirming this, I explained that I overheard Frank talking on the phone with his mom, leading to my decision to return to the US on my own. Expressing his apologies, my father-in-law assured me that I hadn't done anything wrong. When discussing the future, he acknowledged feeling terrible, but mentioned the possibility of divorcing Frank. Understanding the gravity of the situation, he left the decision entirely up to me, saying, "That's completely up to you, Helen." I deeply regret this, especially considering that this should have been a joyous time for us as newlyweds. He apologized to me numerous times, and despite my previous belief that he was avoiding or even disliking me, he spoke with genuine kindness and concern. Despite him being such a good man, I struggled to understand how his wife and my husband had turned out the way they did. While pondering this, he decided to share a personal story with me. "Helen, you've been forced to buy branded items for my wife, haven't you?" he began. I nodded in acknowledgement, and he continued. "Well, yeah, I have. You know, it might have been my fault." "Excuse me?" I responded, puzzled. He went on to explain that shortly after his wife and he got married, he gifted her a designer handbag for her birthday. Unfortunately, this gift sparked her obsession with designer brands, and even at her age, she continued wearing these expensive labels. He expressed frustration, mentioning that there were times when she'd go into debt just to buy them. I was pretty mad at her then. I never imagined she'd ask you to buy stuff for her. Now, I'm really sorry about that. I had no idea that my mother-in-law's obsession with brands had such a backstory. Despite this revelation, my resentment towards her actions persisted. The father-in-law consoled me, stating that it wasn't my fault, and she continued her habits even after he'd become upset with her. Shifting the conversation, he inquired about Frank, noting that he was supposed to have returned by now. Hesitant but determined to be honest, I admitted, about that. I took Frank's passport with me when I came back to the States, so he won't be coming back for a while." The father-in-law expressed understanding, acknowledging the unique circumstances and offering his support. As we continued our conversation, my phone rang suddenly. It was Frank, likely realizing that his passport was missing. With a deep breath, I finally answered the call. "Hello, Frank." His relief was palpable as he exclaimed, "Oh, Helen, thank God you answered. Where the heck are you? I've been worried sick, but I'm just glad you're safe. I'm sorry for making you worry." I received an urgent call from my family back home and had to return. Things got so hectic that I couldn't get in touch. "I get it, but hey, have you seen my passport? I was going to return today, but I can't find it," he inquired. "About that, I accidentally took your passport with me when I rushed back." "What? So what am I supposed to do?" he asked. "You should be able to get a replacement passport there. It'll probably be faster than me sending it to you." "A replacement? What about my job? I can't take any more days off." "Don't worry, I'll explain everything to your company. I'll also talk to your parents about it," I reassured him. "All right then, I'm sorry," he replied. "So that's what's going on. Please be careful when you come back." I hung up the phone and the divorce preparations continued more smoothly, thanks to my father-in-law's support. Finally, the day arrived when Frank managed to get his passport reissued and returned to the States. His mother went to the airport to pick him up, and they came back home together. "We're home. What an ordeal indeed, all because of Helen," Frank remarked. After hearing from Frank that I had returned to the States before him, his mother, apparently upset that their plan failed, started making sarcastic comments toward me. I wanted to snap back at her, but I held my tongue. No worries, they're going to get what's coming to them soon. As soon as Frank and his mother entered the house, my father-in-law, with a stern look, said, "Both of you, come here." He led them to the living room where I was waiting. "Sit down." Frank and his mother seemed a bit flustered, but they couldn't defy his imposing demeanor, so they sat down obediently. I apologize for bringing this up as soon as you guys got back, but there's something really important we need to discuss. Important? I'll cut to the chase, Frank. I want a divorce. Divorce? Hold on, Helen. What's this all about? You trap my son in Venice and then demand a divorce when he comes back. There's a limit to being unreasonable. Unreasonable? Aren't you the unreasonable ones here? What do you mean? I responded. Oh, so you're playing dumb now. Can you explain this then? I showed them pictures of the messages exchanged between Frank and his mother. What's this? These can be easily fabricated these days. This isn't valid proof, they argued. You're right, this might be weak as evidence, but what about this? I pressed the play button on a voice recorder, unveiling a recorded phone conversation between Frank and his mother. My father-in-law had thoughtfully recorded it for me, capitalizing on his wife's hearing impairment, which compelled her to turn the speaker volume to the max during calls, making it audible throughout the house. The conversation laid bare that their scheme had crumbled since I had safely returned to the U.S. It also captured the disappointed voices of my mother-in-law and my husband as they discussed their next move. You can't deny this now, can you? I challenged. Frank pleaded. Wait, Helen, please reconsider the divorce. I only did what my mom told me to. I never wanted any of this, but she kept saying she needed more money to buy her favorite designer items. I just wanted to see her happy, but now I see the light. I don't want to divorce you. Let's leave right now and live happily. It's not too late, right? I was utterly dumbfounded by his words. How on earth could he come up with such a delusional fantasy in his head? You know, I've always thought this, but you really need to stop with the whole mommy thing. It's super creepy. I get that you want to please her, but trying to get rid of your wife and using the insurance money to buy her fancy stuff? No way I'm staying with someone like that. Just the thought gives me a headache. Frank looked defeated by my words. In any case, I asserted, I will definitely be seeking a divorce. Plus, I will also ask for reimbursement for all the designer items you bought with my money. What? But then I won't be able to buy designer items, Frank protested. Even after all this, his mother still seemed obsessed with designer brands. I was truly dumbfounded by this mother and son duo. Enough is enough, I declared. Suddenly my father-in-law interjected. All you care about is yourselves. Do you realize how terrified Helen has been because of your actions? Are designer items really worth it to you, even if it means using someone else's money? Do you realize how much trouble you've caused her? The two of them were taken aback by his outburst, and thanks to him speaking up for me, I felt a bit relieved. But my revenge wasn't over yet. Wait a second, when did you find out about this? On the first night of our honeymoon in Venice, I overheard you talking to your mom in the middle of the night. So that's why you flew back to New York the next morning. You didn't tell my company about this, did you? You're finally catching on. Well, you'll know the answer to that soon enough. Just as I said, Frank's phone started ringing at the perfect time, and it was from the company. You've got to be kidding me. Hesitantly, Frank answered. Hello? Fired? No, wait, it's all a misunderstanding. Before he could explain, the call seemed to have been cut off. Just so you know, I've already provided evidence of this to your company. Having lost both his wife and job, Frank seemed drained of energy and slumped to the floor. So from now on, let's communicate through my lawyer and stay out of my life, okay? And just like that, our newlywed life came to an end. The story didn't stop with the divorce. My lawyer, whom I'd been consulting with, told me that even just plotting to kill someone was a crime. So I reported the matter to the police. While they weren't arrested, both of them had to pay a hefty fine. Thanks to having a criminal record, Frank struggled to find a new job, and Helen became the talk of the town. Moreover, to pay for the damages and alimony, almost all of the designer goods Helen had hoarded were sold off. The only thing left was a purse, a birthday gift from her husband. From now on, the household finances would be managed by her husband, and Helen's pocket money would be reduced. Seems like they got a taste of their own medicine. As for me, I'm living alone in a condo in Manhattan. While I did divorce shortly after getting married, I didn't feel lonely at all. Rather, I felt liberated. If possible, I'd never want to live with someone else again. Sure, living alone has its challenges, but not having to constantly be wary of someone else is more than worth it. And no more dealing with Helen's money grubbing. I've started saving bit by bit, hoping that someday I'd find happiness with someone else.